Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. There is something unbearably tragic about a soul in Warhammer 40k. It's not just a spiritual spark, it's a thing that can scream, fracture, be consumed, trapped, or forgotten. In the Imperium, where humanity is a cog in an endless machine of war and faith, even the soul is not sacred. It is raw material. That reality hits hardest when we speak of the Servitor. Servitors are not machines. They are not drones. They are not merely tools. Every one of them was once a person. Someone who walked, spoke, dreamed, sinned, prayed. Someone with memories, family, fears, laughter. And now they are faceless husks, lobotomized, augmented, and bound to eternal silence. We look at them and see steel. But behind the mask, behind the optic lenses and augmetics, behind the silence, is there something left? This is a story about what happens before the transformation. Not the metal, not the programming, but the soul. What happens to it in those moments of terror and darkness, as it's stripped, erased, or caged? What is the last thing a human soul feels before it becomes a servitor? To become a servitor is not simply to be transformed. It is to be chosen, or condemned, by a system so vast, so indifferent, and so meticulously cruel that it has turned the erasure of human life into an industrial process. Before the flesh is flayed, before the neural pathways are rerouted into cold logic loops, there is paperwork, there is judgment, there is an entire bureaucratic engine designed to strip meaning from a life until it is nothing but a resource. And the soul? The soul is never even asked if it consents. The process begins with classification. Within the sprawling, hive-choked depths of the Imperium's worlds, countless infractions warrant servitorization. Criminals, of course. Thieves, traitors, murderers, but also debtors, political dissidents, heretical whisperers, and even the socially inconvenient. In some worlds, fail to meet your quota for a standard decade, and your fate is sealed. Elsewhere, an ill-timed comment about the Emperor's divine mercy might land you on a conveyor belt to mechanized damnation. There is no pattern except necessity. Servitors are needed endlessly, and so the raw material is always being harvested. The Adeptus Arbites, with their adamantium fists and vox-gridded proclamations, are often the first face a future servitor sees. The sentencing is swift. The trials, if they happen at all, are mockeries of justice, a sacred rite meant only to appease some distant sector law. What matters is not guilt or innocence. What matters is utility. Can the body endure augmetics? Can the nervous system be adapted? Does the subject have a psychic spark that might destabilize the programming? These are the only questions the Imperium cares to answer. Some are chosen not through crime, but through convenience. The Administratum operates with cold arithmetic. On Forge worlds, when production quotas require it, lottery systems are implemented. Entire hab blocks vanish into Mechanicus reclamation vats overnight. Their inhabitants are categorized, tagged, and processed with the same reverence given to scrap metal. The soul, in this phase, is seen as irrelevant, an inefficiency, perhaps even an obstacle to be removed later. What's important is that the numbers align, and then there are the psychers. The Imperium abhors unsanctioned psychers, yet breeds them in terrifying numbers. Not every one of them can be fed to the Emperor's golden throne or trained into an astropath. Many are deemed too unstable, too weak, too dangerous. For them, servitorization offers a convenient end. Their minds are scoured, their souls shunted into null fields or drowned in static wards before their brains are harvested for cortex implant compatibility. It is said, whispered among Black Ship's crew in tones of fear, that some psychers remain partially aware during the transition, their souls too bright to be extinguished. But the Imperium does not care. It records no prayers for these conversions. The soul at this stage is untouched but trembling. The individual still knows their name, their history, their crimes or innocence. Some scream, some pray, some try to kill themselves, only to find the Medicaid drones restraining them, preserving the body with agonizing care. Others are injected with suppressants, their emotional spectrum chemically flattened. Time loses meaning. Daylight is replaced by flickering lumen strips. Human interaction is replaced by cold binary commands. For the Mechanicus, this stage is already a ritual. The data scribes mark compatibility scores. Tech adepts murmur in binaric as they inspect bone density and neural elasticity. The flesh is scanned, mapped, and cataloged. In many forged temples, a liturgical code is recited as the subject is marched toward reclamation. These are not prayers for the soul, they are prayers for efficiency. But even amid all this, there is still a faint beat of defiance, a flicker of identity. The soul is still human, terrified, yes, shattered perhaps, but human. That will not last. What follows is the beginning of unmaking. A journey through darkness where the soul will be watched, scraped, and measured, until the machine gods of the Imperium decide whether it may be permitted to fade or forced to remain. The transformation into a servitor doesn't begin with steel. It begins with silence. Not the absence of sound, but the suffocation of meaning. The first phase of conditioning is psychological, a slow, deliberate crushing of the self beneath the grinding gears of imperial doctrine and mechanicus ritual. The individual, still flesh and blood, is marched into the shadow of annihilation, and the erasure of their soul begins not with death, but with forgetting. Conditioning chambers vary across the Imperium, but their purpose is singular, the breaking of identity. On hive worlds, condemned subjects are sealed within sensory deprivation units. No light, no sound, no time. Hours stretch into days, days dissolve into months, until even the notion of self begins to decay. Individuals scream, beg, hallucinate, but eventually they fall silent. Not because they understand, because they no longer remember how to scream. The Adeptus Mechanicus call this phase pre-cognitive reduction. For them it is sacred. To them, identity is a virus, memory is error, emotion is decay. The human soul in its natural form is an unstable foundation for machine logic. It must be cleansed, so they deploy scrubbing units, neural rewriters that pump streams of binaric static into the mind, overriding thought with raw instruction sets. Imagine 1,000 voices screaming command codes directly into your soul until your own thoughts become indistinguishable from the noise. Memory extraction is common. The Mechanicus may siphon out useful fragments, mechanical experience, language skills, spatial awareness, and discard the rest. Some Forge worlds maintain memory vaults where these fragments are stored like data packets, categorized and archived. Entire lives reduced to isolated code strings. For the subject, what remains is a hollowing, a sense of emotional vertigo. Like waking from a dream and realizing you no longer remember your own name. Others endure more direct rewiring. Neural pathways are severed and rerouted through pre-augmetic implants. The brain is not destroyed, not yet, but reshaped. Logic centers are enhanced. Emotional centers are numbed. Pain receptors are calibrated. In some cases, the speech centers are removed entirely, replaced by a simple audio loop hardwired to obey. The subject can still feel, can still think, but their ability to express or resist is methodically deconstructed. Some resist. There are documented cases, mostly buried in ordo files, of individuals who clung to fragments of identity long into the process. They muttered their children's names. They repeated prayers to the Emperor over and over. They cried in silence, trapped inside bodies they could no longer move. But these are anomalies, glitches. The machine corrects them. Chemical lobotomies, psychic scrubs, electroconvulsive resets. The Imperium does not tolerate ghosts in its machines. Particularly dangerous are those with latent psychic resonance. These individuals, though not potent enough to be classed as psychers, possess souls too strong to shatter easily. Their presence causes instability during conditioning. The Mechanicus refer to them as resonant anomalies. If not properly contained, they can disrupt the servitor programming process, causing seizures, circuit rejections, or even warp interference. Some rogue tech priests believe these souls scream so loud they echo into the immaterium. Others believe the soul simply refuses to go quietly. In such cases, radical measures are taken. Soul-dampening fields are activated, psychic nulls designed to mute the spiritual frequency of the subject. These fields are agonizing. The soul, sensing obliteration, thrashes violently within the shell of the body. Victims describe it, in rare post-experiment reports, as drowning inside yourself. But eventually, even the strongest fade. They are not allowed to die. They are allowed to forget. What remains after this stage is a hollow vessel, not dead, not yet machine, but no longer truly human. A shell with flickers of memory, ghost thoughts that may surface during reactivation but will be quickly overridden. The soul is quiet, not absent, but waiting. Somewhere deep, behind the silence, it still exists. That flicker will be addressed in the next stage. The soul is not broken all at once. It is disassembled layer by layer, each cut more surgical than the last. And the horror is not in the pain, it is in the moments between, the realization that you are still here, still thinking, still watching, as everything that once made you you is washed away in code. In the deep, whispering corridors of the Adeptus Mechanicus, where incense mixes with the scent of burning synapse tissue, the soul is not just observed, it is monitored, quantified, and, in some circles, feared. Once the psychological and neural frameworks have been disassembled, the soul becomes unstable. The Imperium has learned this through horror, through failed servitors that screamed in forbidden tongues, convulsed with warp-born seizures, or wept blood as their programming shattered under the weight of a still burning spirit. To prevent such calamities, psychers are brought in. Not to save the soul, but to smother it safely. The psychic oversight phase is cloaked in secrecy. The official stance of the Adeptus Mechanicus is one of pragmatic ritual. The subject must be psycho-spiritually harmonized. The ecclesiarchy might call it spiritual purification, but among the psychers who perform it, especially those scarred by its echoes, the truth is far darker. They are there to ensure the soul doesn't scream too loud, or worse, attract attention. Each human soul, no matter how insignificant, burns with a faint light in the warp. Normally that light is muffled by the noise of the Imperium, drowned in faith, duty, and structured psychic reality. But when the mind is stripped and the body violated, the soul flares in confusion and pain. It thrashes, becomes erratic. If left unguarded, such instability can tear open micro-rifts into the warp, allowing predators, never-born things that smell suffering like blood, to claw their way in. To mitigate this, the Imperium employs sanctioned psychers, often low-tier telepaths, who specialize in soul-calming protocols. These individuals are broken in their own right, many burned out from years of warp exposure, their voices barely above whispers. They approach the future servitor not with care, but with resigned detachment. Through soul-binding rituals and telepathic filters, they project enforced serenity into the mind. Manufactured calmness that smothers panic and numbs the final vestiges of personality. These sessions are not gentle. The subject often resists. In rare moments, a powerful psychic resonance can rebound, injuring or even killing the overseen psycher. These events are referred to as soul flarebacks. Survivors of such encounters speak of being flooded with memories not their own, flashes of childhood, joy, terror, guilt, all compressed into a psychic scream of identity fighting annihilation. After such incidents, extra measures are taken. The subject is wrapped in psi-dampening coils, their brain flooded with blank slate chemicals, and the soul itself is bracketed, held in place through ritual bindings learned during the dark age of technology, and scarcely understood even now. Not all worlds afford such precision. On frontier planets or overrun hive worlds, psycher oversight is crude or absent. Here, failures occur. Servitors twitch and babble corrupted prayers. Some become vectors of spiritual contagion, leaking raw warp energy in barely perceptible pulses. It is said that in the underchapels of Gethsemane Hive, entire manufactoria were shut down after a wave of rogue servitors exhibited synchronized psychic phenomena, a shared memory of drowning that echoed across 50,000 units. The Mechanicus purged the site, but whispers remain. Was it a psychic fragment? Or was it the soul trying to be remembered? In rarer and darker circles, particularly among the radical magi and soul theorists of Mars' shadow factions, the oversight phase is exploited rather than avoided. These tech priests do not calm the soul, they record it. Using forbidden psi sigils and Blackstone lattice matrices, they map the soul's final pre-servitor state, capturing emotional resonance patterns and soul density fluctuations. To them, this data is priceless. It proves the soul is real, measurable, and therefore manipulable. These studies are heretical in every sense, yet their findings leak through the data networks of the Adeptus Mechanicus like a virus of doubt. There are even rumors, denied vehemently by Mars, that the Ordo Reductor once attempted to forge a servitor from a blank. A human with no warp presence, no soul. The experiment failed catastrophically. The resulting construct was more accurate, more efficient, but every tech priest who worked on it died within weeks. No cause found, only burn marks and the phrase "something is missing" scratched into their walls. The soul cannot be ignored. Not in a universe where thought becomes reality and emotion can summon gods. The Imperium may despise the soul's volatility, but it fears its absence more. And so, psyker oversight is a grim necessity, not to preserve the soul, but to make it quiet enough to proceed. What remains afterward is a soul dulled to the point of near extinction, hovering at the edge of perception, waiting for the knife. Not to kill, but to remake. The rites of flesh reclamation are not performed in silence. They are conducted to the rhythmic chimes of cogitator bells, the screeching of hydraulic limbs, and the low binaric murmurs of tech priests communing with their machine gods. The transformation of a human body into a servitor is not seen as butchery. It is considered sacred. But within this reverence lies a cruelty so profound, so systematized, that even the most seasoned inquisitors have described the process with horror. This is the realm of the Adeptus Mechanicus, where the human form is not destroyed, but reconfigured. The soul is still tethered, barely watching its temple be desecrated under the guise of divine improvement. Once the psychological and psychic purging is complete, the body is led, or more often dragged, into the Mechanicus sanctum. Here, surgery becomes liturgy. Steel arms descend from the vaulted ceilings, their movements precise and practiced, as if choreographed through centuries of refinement. Every cut, every replacement, is made according to sacred schematics etched into data slates and inscribed on the metal bones of the tech priests themselves. But make no mistake, this is not medicine. This is engineering, and it begins with the unmaking of the flesh. The first to go are the extremities. Hands and feet are too human, too unpredictable. They are replaced with manipulators, tools, claws, welding nozzles, or whatever apparatus the servitor's future function requires. Then the eyes, unreliable organic sensors, are swapped for ocular augmetics, their fields of vision narrowed and coded for specific tasks. The ears are sealed, the tongue removed. Communication becomes binary. Expression is obsolete. What is left of the brain is another matter entirely. It is never fully removed. That would risk losing the motor control and reflex centers that the Mechanicus still finds efficient. But higher functions are laced with cortex implants. These metal intrusions burrow into thought, rewriting instinct with command protocols. The will is crushed under layers of subroutines. Some versions include aggression inhibitors. Others include pain dampeners, not to spare the servitor suffering, but to prevent self-damage during task execution. There is no anesthesia, not in the conventional sense. The subject is kept conscious through the early stages, then sedated into a dreamless void. But the soul remains aware, in that strange, liminal way that some psychers describe during warp travel. A sense of floating, watching, screaming internally. This awareness has been confirmed in more than one case by sanctioned telepaths who dared to peer into a mid-process subject. What they saw was not peace, it was terror. Fragmented memories chasing themselves in a loop. A prayer half remembered, a face without a name, a sense that something vital had been taken but no knowledge of what or why. The rites themselves vary by Forge World. On Mars, the rituals are coldly precise, executed with mechanical elegance. On Ryza, there is more flamboyance, crackling energy coils and radiant displays, as if the act of desecration must also be a spectacle. In the darker reaches of Stygies VIII, the procedure borders on cruelty. There, tech priests revel in experimental modifications, testing thresholds of pain and obedience. These heretical rites are sometimes passed off as enhanced adaptability protocols, but whispers persist of entire vaults filled with failed units, half-flesh, half-steel monstrosities that twitch and mutter in forgotten tongues. Yet even in the most orthodox forges, there is an eerie reverence. Each cut is blessed, each augmetic fitted with holy oils. The tech priests chant praises to the Omnissiah, their voices modulated through vox grills that strip all emotion. To them, they are not destroying a person. They are purifying a resource, elevating it, making it useful. The soul? If it is mentioned at all, it is only in terms of containment, ensuring it does not interfere with function. Its screams are irrelevant. One might wonder why the soul isn't simply removed. Why not destroy it entirely and spare it the agony? The answer lies in paradox. The Imperium simultaneously believes in the sanctity of the human soul and the necessity of its containment. To erase the soul would be heresy. To free it would be wasteful. So it is shackled, muted, buried under metal and code until it is no longer a soul, but a spark, a faint glow trapped behind glass. There have been moments, rare, buried in classified archives, when a servitor paused mid-task and seemed to remember. A twitch of the mouth, a flicker of the eye, a single tear rolling down a cheek of plasteel and scar tissue. These anomalies are purged immediately, their bodies scrapped, their cortex units incinerated. But those who saw them never forget, because in that moment, the soul screamed through the steel. The tech priests never speak of this. To them, the rites are perfect. The process is divine. And yet, the shrines they build to the machine god are lined with servo skulls, once human faces, polished and wired, floating on anti-grav coils. Silent, watching, remembering. Every servitor was once someone, and the soul, though buried, knows what was taken. It remembers. In the silence that comes before full conversion, there is a moment unlike any other. A strange, shivering pause between thought and obedience, between identity and oblivion. A moment so brief that a cogitator would miss it, yet so profound that those rare few who have glimpsed it speak of it in hushed tones, as though naming it aloud might awaken something best left sleeping. It is the final flicker, the soul's last breath before the machinery completes its claim. And in that instant, something watches from within. No Mechanicus manual acknowledges this moment. No servitor logs record it. Yet across the Imperium, among the darkest margins of lore and whispered recollections of broken psychers and rogue magi, there exists a theory that the soul, even when all else has been stripped away, resists final silence. It does not surrender willingly, and in that breathless space, it cries out. Not in words, not in sound, but in raw, formless emotion. Those who have stood witness describe it differently. Some feel a ripple like heat through a pressure seal. Others experience a chill, a sense of someone walking over their grave. Inquisition interrogators, hardened against the warp and its tricks, have spoken of a presence, faint as smoke, that hovers just above the skin of the world, reaching out. In those final seconds, the soul knows it is about to be caged, and it lashes, not in violence, but in memory. This is the phase most feared by the soul-monitoring psychers, the moment before final integration, when the cortex chip fuses permanently and the command hierarchy asserts dominance over all motor and neural functions. Until this point, the subject may still dream. The body twitches not from pain, but from echoes, phantom sensations of what it used to be. One soul handler, later institutionalized, claimed he heard a servitor to be whispering his own name just seconds before his vocal cords were replaced with an audio repeater. And there are darker rumors, stories of servitors who in that moment reached out psychically, not consciously, not with intent, but in a kind of primal broadcast. Their souls flaring like dying stars sent out a final pulse, not a scream for help, not a plea, but something deeper. A memory, a truth, a final fragment of who they were. One story, from the black vaults of the Ordo Malleus, speaks of an entire wing of servitors that froze mid-task, all at once, their eyes flickering with something akin to grief. When examined, each one repeated the same phrase. I was warm. They were deactivated. The facility was quarantined. The logs were expunged. There is no way to confirm these tales. The Mechanicus denies them, naturally. To the tech priests, the soul is a byproduct, a spiritual inefficiency tolerated only because the human substrate demands it. But the few remaining biologist-theologians argue otherwise. They believe the soul is not merely an attachment to the body. It is a network, a lattice of memory, emotion, intention, and most critically, desire. That desire does not vanish in the face of servitorization. It simply becomes trapped. That is what makes this moment so terrifying, because within that desire lies identity. Even when everything else is gone. Even when the brain has been cut to pieces, the senses dulled, the memories erased, and the body remade, there is still something, a flicker, a shape, a feeling. Sometimes it is love, sometimes hatred, but most often it is fear. Not fear of pain, not even of death, but fear of being forgotten, of becoming a tool with no story, a machine with no meaning. Among the most heretical texts, locked behind triple-sealed encryptions in the archives of the Inquisition, there exists a phrase scrawled in blood across a data slate. The soul dies only when it is no longer seen. What if that moment, that brief flicker before silence, is the soul trying to be seen one last time? Trying to say, I was here, I existed, I mattered. The Imperium does not answer. The tech priests do not listen. The machinery completes its work. The final circuit locks into place. The cortex chip asserts control, and the servitor's eyes dim to protocol. Tasks are assigned, movements begin, and the last echo of the soul, unheard, fades beneath layers of logic. But some say, in quiet places where the omniscient's gaze does not reach, that the soul never quite goes. That in the stillness between machine whirs and command signals, if you listen closely, you can still hear it. Not a cry, not a scream, just a whisper. The last thought of a human being, echoing forever, inside a body that will never speak again. A servitor is not merely a thing, it is a statement, a declaration that the human soul can be overwritten, its sanctity forfeited in service of efficiency. Yet, across the splintered orders of the Adeptus Mechanicus and the doctrine-torn cathedrals of the ecclesiarchy, there exists a deeper, more terrible understanding that servitorization is not just transformation, it is unsoul-making, the deliberate crushing, negation, and rewriting of a soul into something that no longer qualifies as sentient, sacred, or even alive. And in this act, the Imperium reveals a contradiction so vast it threatens the very foundations of its spiritual dogma. To be human, in the Imperium's theology, is to possess a soul. That soul is the Emperor's domain, a sacred ember carried within every loyal citizen, no matter how low-born or flawed. The ecclesiarchy preaches that this ember is eternal, precious, a reflection of his divine light. Yet in servitorization, that same ember is not protected. It is not even mourned. It is systematically muted. The result is a creature that walks, functions, obeys, but does not feel, desire, or dream. In every meaningful way, the soul is no longer active. It is present only as a ghostly remainder, a haunting afterimage of the person who once was. This state defies categorization. Servitors are not machines. They contain living tissue, organic processing, biochemical functions. Nor are they human. Their agency is extinguished, their consciousness voided. So what are they? The answer, terrifyingly, may be that they are something in between. A class of existence never intended to be. A spiritual limbo engineered by mankind's own hands. Within the ecclesiarchy, this contradiction festers. Low-tier confessors wrestle with it in silence. Some pen secret litanies of apology for each servitor they pass, whispering blessings not authorized by canon. Others rationalize it, claiming the soul, once stripped of memory and desire, no longer suffers and is therefore at peace. But deeper scholars, those permitted into the vault libraries beneath Ophelia's seventh, know better. They study the soul path readings of pre-servitor subjects. The data shows movement, change, resistance, pain. The soul does not fade, it is overwritten. There is a difference, a heretical difference. The Adeptus Mechanicus, by contrast, embraces this process. They call it purification. The flesh is weak, yes, but the soul, to them, is unstructured data, spiritual noise. By reducing the human being into a streamlined functional unit, they believe they are not destroying the soul but refining it. In some forge worship rituals, servitors are seen as perfected states, no longer bound by erratic thoughts or fragile emotions. They are considered soul-zeroed, cleansed of all identity, existing only to serve. It is this very logic that allows a tech priest to look into the dead eyes of a servitor they just created and feel nothing but pride. Yet rumors persist of dissonance. Data psalms corrupted by flickers of thought not programmed, efficiency rates suddenly dropping for no explainable reason. Servitors pausing, mid-motion, for a heartbeat too long, as if remembering. The magi who report these things are often silenced, reassigned, or simply vanish. Because to admit such anomalies is to admit that the soul was never truly erased, only buried. And what is buried may one day rise. Radical factions of both Mechanicus and ecclesiarchy have begun to explore this idea. They do not speak of it in open circles, for it borders on techno-heresy and spiritual blasphemy. But in coded prayers and encrypted diagrams, they pose a question. What if servitorization is not the destruction of the soul, but a form of inversion? What if, in turning the soul inward, they have created a being that still is, but no longer can be? These theories suggest that servitors exist in a state of negative soul space, not absence but inversion. A soul twisted inward, its energies rerouted through synthetic pathways, forced into a recursive loop of obedience. If true, then every servitor is not a failure of humanity, but a mirror held to its darkest truth, that the soul, even when shattered, cannot be destroyed, only used. And that is perhaps the greatest horror. Not that the soul dies in the process, but that it doesn't, that it survives, reduced to background noise, stripped of self, and left to echo through wires and flesh until the end of its assigned function, that it watches, feels, remembers, in fragments. And that we, the Imperium, have found a way to use that unceasing awareness without acknowledging it. To create a servitor is not just to build a tool, it is to sculpt a tomb, not for the body, but for the soul. A silent sarcophagus of flesh and code, where the last vestiges of what was once a person pulse faintly beneath the surface, unseen and unheeded. This is unsoul-making. This is what the Imperium has normalized. And still, the soul remains, trapped, waiting. They say servitors do not dream. They say that once the mind is lobotomized, the thoughts erased, the will subjugated by programming, all inner experience ceases. But this is a lie. Or perhaps it is simply a myth of comfort. A lie told by those who need to believe that what they are doing is mercy. In the hidden corners of the Imperium, far from the approved liturgies and sacred manuals, there are accounts. Whispered by rogue psychers, confessed by dying tech priests, scribbled in the margins of heretical texts seized by the Inquisition. Accounts that say otherwise, that speak of servitors who dream. But these are not dreams like ours. There are no stories, no sequences, no fantasies. What flickers inside the cortex cage of a servitor is not a narrative, but an echo, an emotional residue. A looping fragment of soul light trapped beneath 1,000 layers of protocol. A glitch in the silence, a memory that refuses to die. The Mechanicus has long denied this possibility. Their codices declare that servitor thought is limited to command processing, error checking, and maintenance subroutines. But the truth is harder to dismiss. Reports have emerged from deep within Forge World laboratories of servitors who, when left inactive for extended periods, begin to twitch, not from mechanical failure, but from a kind of internal tremor. One tech adept recorded a unit humming an unknown tune with a vocal emulator that should have been long disabled. The tune, when analyzed, bore a 97% match to a folk lullaby from the subject's origin hive spire. Other incidents are harder to ignore. A fabrication servitor in Hive Kador stopped mid-task, turned its head toward a maintenance worker, and whispered, "I forgive you." The voice was slurred, mechanical, but recognizably human. The worker, a former overseer of the penal induction camps, collapsed in tears. The servitor was dismantled within the hour. The Mechanicus log labeled it a corrupted unit. Some in the Ordo Xenos believe these phenomena represent soul flashback events, spontaneous flare-ups of memory resonance from the suppressed consciousness. These echoes are not intentional. The servitor does not choose to remember. It is not dreaming in the sense of active imagination. Rather, it is reliving, involuntarily, unpredictably, and often only for seconds at a time, like a broken machine replaying a damaged data fragment over and over, not knowing what it means. Psychers, especially those attuned to empathy, are more sensitive to these flashes. Some report feeling a sudden wave of emotion when near dormant servitors: grief, longing, fear. One astropath in training described hearing a choir of voices with no mouths weeping inside a steel tomb. He was removed from service and lobotomized for his instability. But the others who heard his report still wonder. There is one particular case that has become infamous among the Inquisition's hidden chambers. A servitor designated Unit 344 NW, deployed as a door watcher in a remote listening post on the edge of Segmentum Obscurus, began to exhibit anomalous behavior. At precisely midnight local time, for 6 consecutive nights, it scratched the same symbol into the wall with its tool arm. A spiral, interwoven with flame. The 7th night, it spoke. Just once. "The fire is cold here." No explanation was found. The unit was destroyed. The listening post was abandoned. The wall remains. Some radicals within the Mechanicus argue that what we are seeing is not a flaw, but a proof. That these dream echoes are evidence that the soul cannot be fully overwritten. That even when stripped of language, will, memory, and autonomy, something still remains. Something deep, pre-verbal. A core spark that, when the programs fail or the silence deepens, rises like smoke from a long-dead fire. They argue, too, that this is not merely a tragedy, it is an opportunity. That by mapping these dreams, by decoding the language of echo and fragment, they can one day control the soul directly. Make servitors not just tools, but vessels. Obedient, yes, but also psychically responsive. Alive, but owned. Conscious, but compliant. The soul as engine. The ethical implications of this are, of course, catastrophic. But the Imperium does not shy from such questions. It suppresses them, silences them, buries them. Because to admit that servitors dream, even in broken flashes, even in whispers, is to admit that they are still human. That beneath the metal and programming and silence, there is still a person, locked in place. And if that is true, then every use of a servitor is not just a convenience. It is a crime, a blasphemy, a slavery worse than any chain, because the prisoner cannot speak, cannot remember, and cannot die. So we say they do not dream. Because the alternative, that they do, and that we made them dream this way, is unbearable. The Imperium does not flinch from paradox. It is a regime built on contradiction, worshipping a dead god, deifying suffering, and declaring the human soul sacred while feeding it to machines. But among its greatest hypocrisies lies in its treatment of the servitor. It is perhaps the clearest, most damning symbol of the Imperium's spiritual schizophrenia. Here is a being, once human, stripped of autonomy, purpose, and self, turned into a flesh machine, all with the full blessing of the Emperor's clergy and the Mechanicus alike. How can this coexist with the claim that every human soul is divine? Why does the Emperor allow this? The truth is, the Imperium does not allow it. It requires it. The creation of servitors is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. Without them, the Imperium would collapse in a matter of days. There are not enough workers, not enough soldiers, not enough minds to fuel the great machine of humanity. And so the line between sacred and expendable was drawn in blood millennia ago and never reconsidered. The Ecclesiarchy justifies it with scripture. The Lectitio Divinitatis speaks of obedience and service, of surrendering one's will to the God Emperor. The transformation of a criminal, heretic, or malfunctioning citizen into a servitor is recast not as punishment, but as salvation. A second chance, a repurposing. Some preachers even say that to be made a servitor is a blessing, a way for the soul to continue serving the Imperium even after its sins have made it unworthy of human status. It is spiritual recycling, a grim mercy. Yet this justification is hollow. Deep within the Ecclesiarchy's own archives are secret texts, theologian diaries, and restricted homilies that hint at discomfort. There are records of saints who spoke out against servitorization, who claimed it was a form of damnation, not redemption. These figures are rarely canonized. Their teachings are buried or reframed. But the doubt lingers, like incense that never fades. Some confessors report sleepless nights after long exposure to servitors, not from fear, but guilt. Meanwhile, the Adeptus Mechanicus sees no contradiction. To them, the human soul is not sacred, but incidental. What matters is function, structure, output. A servitor is a tool, superior to an automaton because it carries the adaptive capacity of the biological, but with none of its inconvenient selfhood. Tech priests speak of cognitive minimization, of biological interface efficiency, never of suffering, never of personhood. They do not consider what is lost, only what is gained. This perspective is cold, alien, and utterly essential to the survival of the Imperium. It is this alliance between spiritual hypocrisy and technological nihilism that sustains the servitor system. And because of that, it is rarely questioned. Those who dare ask why the soul is preserved just enough to power obedience, but not enough to permit resistance, find themselves isolated, or silenced, or, in the most tragic irony, turned into the very thing they condemned. There are exceptions, of course. Inquisitors of the Ordo Hereticus who have peered too deeply into the matter have emerged changed, no longer willing to rely on servitor attendants, speaking in strange riddles about voices in the silence. One radical among the Ordo Malleus suggested that servitors are a kind of spiritual abomination, not because they are soulless, but because they are half-souled, and that such beings are ideal vessels for demonic influence. His work was suppressed. His servitors were found wandering the halls days after his disappearance, their command protocols deleted. And then there is the Emperor. The question that echoes in the heart of every faithful servant. How can he allow this? The High Lords of Terra would answer that he does not intervene in such small matters, that his gaze is fixed upon the fate of all humanity, not the suffering of a few. But there are other theories, that the Emperor does not approve, but endures, that he tolerates servitors not as justice, but as failure, a compromise forced upon his dream by the decay of his empire. And still others claim the emperor cannot see them, that the transformation renders the soul invisible, unreadable, untouchable even by him. This is the unspoken fear, that in our quest to sustain the Imperium, we have created things not only beneath his notice, but beyond his reach. That a servitor is not just a fallen human, but a soul lost, not to chaos, but to silence. And still, the assembly lines roll on. The lobotomy tools are sterilized, the cortex chips are implanted, the prayers are read, the machines are made. The hypocrisy is never named, the contradiction is never resolved. Because in the Imperium, survival matters more than truth. And nothing proves that better than the servitor, a creature that should not exist, yet does. Because the Imperium needs it to. There exists a theory, whispered in the deepest corners of Mechanicus vaults and the shadowed chapels of forbidden sects, that servitorization is not the end of the soul, but a beginning. Not a byproduct of punishment or utility, but a hidden opportunity. A method not to discard the soul, but to extract it, to harvest it, to store it. This is the heresy of the soul capture doctrine, a belief that in making servitors, the Imperium is not destroying human essence, it is collecting it. Among the radical tech priests, particularly those aligned with the Dark Mechanicum or Rogue Forge cults, this belief is not metaphorical. They speak of soul containment, not as theology, but as data. The human soul, in their twisted vision, is a form of exotic energy, measurable, quantifiable, even transferable. Servitorization, in this context, is a means to an end, a crude yet effective method of isolating the soul, separating it from the messy distractions of selfhood, emotion, and memory, until only the core frequency remains. Then, using ancient devices, relics of the dark age of technology or reverse-engineered Xenos artifacts, they extract it. One such device is known in Forbidden Mechanicus lore as the Soul Siphon. Descriptions vary, but most agree it resembles a frame of blackened adamantium, inscribed with symbols that pulse in ways no sensor can record. When a subject is connected, typically midway through servitorization, the device activates, drawing out what the Mechanicus call psychokinetic resonance. The body dies, the soul does not. It is captured, sealed in a soul vault, a crystalline matrix suspended within a field of null energy. Within this prison, the soul is preserved in a state of agonized stasis, unable to move on, unable to return, unable to even fade. What happens next depends on the faction. Some of the more grotesque Dark Mechanicum groups feed these soul vaults into daemon engines, believing the tortured essence strengthens the warp machine interface. Others use them to power exotic weaponry, soul lances, banshee mines, and dissonance field generators. A few go further still, attempting to communicate with the contained souls, to extract memories, knowledge, or predictions from their fractured awareness. These experiments are rarely successful. The souls do not speak, they scream. More disturbingly, there are rumors that even within loyalist Mechanicus factions, lesser versions of these technologies are being employed. While not as overtly heretical, they operate on similar principles. Certain inquisitors believe that some STCs contain designs for cogitator-hosted soul prints, digital echoes of consciousness that, once extracted from servitor-bound subjects, can be used to inform predictive algorithms. These are not full consciousnesses, but spiritual shadows, stripped of agency, but capable of pattern recognition far beyond that of standard AI. It is no coincidence that these technologies resemble what the Dark Age of technology once achieved with the infamous Men of Iron. Back then, humanity played recklessly with artificial minds. Some argue that the soul capture technology now being rediscovered is a remnant of that era, disguised under Mechanicus ritual and dogma. The implications are monstrous. If a servitor's soul can be stored, then it can also be repurposed, used again and again, until nothing remains but a flicker of pain that no longer even remembers why it suffers. The ecclesiarchy, of course, denies all of this. To them, the soul belongs to the emperor, not to man, and certainly not to machines. They claim that any attempt to capture or store it is not just heresy, but a violation of divine law. Yet their silence on the subject grows louder each year. Few within the church openly investigate the deeper layers of Forge World temples. And those who do rarely return unchanged. There are stories, even within the Inquisition, of experiments conducted on dead servitors. of opening their cortex chips, scanning their neural networks, and finding data fragments that should not exist, not command loops or task directives, but thoughts. Flashbacks, prayers, grief. These aren't machine errors. They are echoes of the soul, embedded in circuits. Some agents believe these are the result of failed soul captures. Others think they are the soul trying to escape. The most terrifying theory, though, is the simplest: that servitors are not husks left behind after the soul is gone. They are containers. That the entire process, the lobotomization, the augmentation, the suppression, is not to erase the soul, but to bind it. And that the cortex chip isn't just a control device, but a lock, a spiritual manacle. In this light, servitors are not tragedies. They are prisons. And every silent, shuffling drone we pass in the corridor, every grotesque metal-mouthed laborer chained to a console, is not just a tool. It is a captive, a soul, screaming behind the code, waiting for a freedom that will never come. This is the soul harvest, not myth, not exaggeration, but perhaps the greatest hidden sin of the Imperium. In the darkest corners of forbidden vaults, where the light of the Emperor is weakest and the boundary between technology and witchcraft thins, whispers speak of materials beyond understanding, substances that defy the known laws of reality. Chief among these is Blackstone. Revered, feared, misunderstood, Blackstone is not merely a mineral. It is a container, a blank slate in physical form, capable of absorbing, muting, or redirecting warp energy. And according to heretical data fragments and occult Mechanicus records, it may also be the key to understanding what happens to a servitor's soul when it does not fade, but is stored. Blackstone, particularly in its processed form known as noctilith, is known to disrupt psychic phenomena. Its presence can silence astropaths, scatter demons, and neutralize warp-active devices. It is a void in solid form, a wall against unreality. For this reason, it has been used by both loyalist and traitor factions to contain unstable psychers, construct psychic null zones, and, in the most profane applications, trap souls. The theory is simple, terrifying, and largely denied: that Blackstone can absorb not just warp energy but spiritual residue. That when placed within proximity to a dying soul, or a soul being stripped of its identity, as in the case of servitorization, it captures a fragment, not memory, not personality, but something deeper. The emotional imprint, the soul's final scream. In certain black site forges, where tech priests no longer wear red but deep gray or none at all, there are experiments where a sliver of Blackstone is embedded within the cranial cavity of a servitor mid-conversion. The results are recorded in binaric tones, never spoken aloud, but they point to a disturbing consistency. The servitors become quieter, not in sound, but in presence. Psychers report being unable to sense anything. No flicker, no echo, no emotional residue, just emptiness, as if the soul was not erased, but transferred into the stone. These Blackstone-implanted units are referred to in secret Mechanicus lexicons as holoframes. Unlike standard servitors, they exhibit almost perfect obedience, even under duress that would cause cortex loops to fail. They do not twitch. They do not hesitate. They simply function, as if there is nothing left inside them capable of conflict. Some tech priests consider this a triumph. Others refuse to speak of them at all. The theory goes further. Some heretics believe these soul fragments remain active within the Blackstone, not alive, but aware. Trapped in an eternal moment of submission, looping through the last sensation they felt before the cortex chip silenced them. In rare experiments using Xenos sensors or warp-attuned Vox recorders, strange signals have been captured from Blackstone cores recovered from destroyed servitors. Signals that, when decoded, form patterns of weeping or prayers or screams. None of it makes sense. All of it feels wrong. More disturbing still are the attempts to interact with these memories. Radical inquisitors and rogue magi have begun theorizing that these Blackstone shards are not just storage, but access points. That by interfacing the right psi-tech, they can retrieve the soul echo. This has led to horrifying test results: Blackstone servitor units that suddenly repeat long-forgotten personal names, or recite poetry, or describe the feeling of drowning in fire. One unit reportedly said, "I am still here." It was immediately incinerated. The moral implications of this are almost incomprehensible. If Blackstone truly holds soul memory, then servitorization becomes not just a sentence of slavery, but of eternal spiritual incarceration. A prison with no bars, no passage of time, no hope of redemption. And if Blackstone can store multiple fragments, then it is not merely a psychic null. It is a crypt, a mass grave of consciousness. And yet the Mechanicus continues, because the potential is too valuable. Servitor systems enhanced with Blackstone components have been shown to resist warp interference, operate in demon-infested zones, and maintain function even during psychic storms. Some within the Ordo Xenos believe this is why Necron constructs, ancient users of Blackstone, are so resistant to warp influence. They do not lack souls, they have buried them permanently. There are growing fears among the more superstitious ranks of the ecclesiarchy that these practices have gone too far. That the use of Blackstone in this way has created spiritual black holes, not just dead zones, but places where the Emperor's light cannot reach, places where prayers do not echo, where even death cannot find you. And still, the process continues. Because the Imperium does not stop for philosophy, it marches on, dragging its soul behind it in chains of its own forging. So the next time you pass a servitor, eyes dead behind their augmatic optics, ask yourself, is there something inside still watching? And if so, where is it? Behind the code? Behind the meat? Or trapped in a shard of stone, pulsing coldly in the dark? To see a servitor through the eyes of a sister of battle is to confront a tragedy not wrapped in steel, but in silence. For the sisterhood, the daughters of the Emperor, the brides of his eternal flame, the soul is sacred. It is not theoretical, it is not symbolic, it is real, tangible, luminous. The soul is the thread that binds all humanity to the Emperor. And when that thread is cut, desecrated, or silenced, something within the sisterhood mourns. Imagine her, armored in ceramite, singing litanies of vengeance as she marches through the ruins of a fallen hive. Around her, servitors lumber, half-men with bolters fused to their arms, vox receivers wired into their skulls. They obey, they never hesitate, they never falter. They are perfect tools. But every time one moves, she hears the ghost of a voice that once prayed. She does not say this aloud. The sisterhood has no room for doubt. But in the quiet moments, between battles, between prayers, some sisters weep for the tools they must use. Because once she looked into the eyes of a Medicae servitor and saw something flicker. Not understanding, not awareness, but pain. A soul, perhaps, too stubborn to let go. Not every sister struggles. Many see servitors as tools no different from bolters or auspex scanners. They were criminals, heretics, failures, reshaped to serve in the only way they could. But for others, the contradiction becomes a wound. The Emperor died to preserve mankind's soul. Yet here, in his own ecclesiarchal cathedrals, souls are muted, rewritten, entombed in metal. For efficiency. One sister confessor, whose name is lost to the archives but remembered in whispered legend, refused to allow servitors in her presence. She believed that to witness a silenced soul was to fail the Emperor's purpose. She preached that a soul made mute could not truly serve, that obedience without spirit was hollow. Her sermons were soft, sorrowful things, filled with images of broken angels and weeping martyrs. She was eventually exiled. Not for heresy, but for discomfort. The ecclesiarchy cannot afford to question its own tools. Another sister, a hospitaller serving on a forge world during a genestealer outbreak, once performed last rites on a dying servitor, not out of doctrine, but out of instinct. She placed her hand on the creature's chest, cold metal and scar tissue, and spoke the benediction of final light. For a moment, the servitor twitched. A faint moan escaped its lips. A tear welled in its remaining organic eye. Then it went still. The tech priests demanded an explanation. She gave none. The sisterhood is not blind. They know the Imperium survives on compromise. They know that without servitors, factories stall, ships drift, temples crumble. But that does not make the truth easier. They live in tension, between duty and compassion, faith and pragmatism. They fight for the Emperor's vision of mankind's glory, even as they are surrounded by reminders of its defilement. In their private prayers, some sisters ask forgiveness not for their own sins, but for the sins they witness. The sins they are complicit in. The sins of silence. They ask the Emperor to find the souls buried in servitor shells and guide them home when the metal fails. They pray that he hears their screams, even if no one else does. And still, they use them. They give commands. They accept aid. They march beside them into the fire, because there is no alternative. because this is the Imperium. But when a sister stands in the aftermath of battle, surrounded by corpses both machine and man, she sometimes kneels beside a ruined servitor, whispers a half-forbidden prayer, and places her rosary on its chest. Not because she believes it will awaken, not because she expects a miracle, but because she remembers that someone once loved this soul. That once, it was a person. And because in the quiet war between utility and reverence, she chooses to fight in her own way, not with a bolter, but with a moment of mourning. A war of silence, and sorrow, and memory. There is a moment, so small it cannot be timed, so quiet it cannot be recorded, where the soul, the true soul of a human being, dies not in pain, not in fire, not in chaos, but in silence. This is not the moment of lobotomy, not the implanting of the cortex chip, not even the final overwriting of memory. No, the soul's final death comes just after, when all struggle ends, when it realizes that no one is coming, that it has been forgotten. Some call this the last thought, not a phrase, not a memory, but a feeling. A soul's final impression before it vanishes into the endless null of servitorhood. And though none can say with certainty what this moment contains, across all theories, all faiths, and all fears, one thing is agreed upon. It is a moment of infinite loneliness. In that final breath, what does the soul feel? Some say it is grief. A sorrow so deep it cannot be processed, as it lets go of every name it once knew, every place it ever stood, every word it ever spoke. Others say it is terror, the realization that awareness will continue, dimmed, trapped, forced to witness its own erasure again and again through endless tasks and silent years. But perhaps the worst theory is not about pain or fear at all. Perhaps the soul's final thought is simply acceptance, that it lets go, that it gives in, that it agrees to be forgotten because it no longer has the strength to resist, that the final moment of the human spirit is one of surrender. Not to faith, not to hope, but to nothing. The Adeptus Mechanicus has no ritual for this. No blessing is given, no shrine marks the passage. The conversion ends, the unit is activated, the task begins. The world moves on, and the soul stops. But sometimes, rarely, tragically, something is left behind. Not consciousness, not resistance. Just a trace, a pattern in the code, a hesitation in the movement, a flicker in the eye. And those who witness it are never the same. Amagos once wrote in a personal encrypted log, "I have seen the eyes of 1,000 servitors. Only one ever blinked when I said its old name." He deleted the file, but the memory remained. An inquisitorial acolyte once reported hearing a servitor say, during routine maintenance, "I was cold." The unit had no speech function. The recording was erased. The acolyte was reassigned. A sister hospitaller, long retired, once confessed that she kissed the brow of a dying servitor and swore she felt it lean into the touch, not from programming, not from muscle memory, but from longing. She never told anyone again. These are not facts, they are shadows, but they matter. Because they mean the last thought exists. It is not catalogued, it is not measured, but it is real. It is the last flicker of defiance in a galaxy that has no mercy. And perhaps if enough people remember that, if enough people care, then one day, when the machines fall silent and the stars grow cold, the last thought might not be forgotten after all. It might be heard. And if this glimpse into the soul's final silence has stirred something within you, a question, a sorrow, a rage, then stay with us. Subscribe to the channel, share this story, and keep the light of empathy alive in the darkness of the 41st millennium. Because someone has to remember the silence, even if it's only us.